when the kind of internet discourse about men always thinking about the Roman Empire came up, and your very smart response, which I identified with, is like that for women the Roman Empire is Tudor history.
Yes, it's Anne Boleyn.
That might be my Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
Welcome to 1999, the podcast. I am John Brooks.
And I'm Julia Sermons.
And in this episode, we are talking about a great summer movie that was released on December the 25th. I admit that I forgot that this was, in fact, a Christmas movie, somehow, despite the fact that it has all the vibes and hallmarks of a summer movie. The 30th highest grossing movie of 1999, and the second feature film, both overall and in as many years, following the Vince Gilligan-penned Home Fries with Drew Barrymore and Luke Wilson in 1998, from accomplished television director Dean Parisot. Written by David Howard and Rob Gordon, and starring Tim Allen, Sigourney Weaver, Alan Rickman, Enrico Colantoni, Tony Shaloub, Sam Rockwell, Darryl Chill Mitchell, Robin Sachs, Patrick Breen, Missy Pyle, Jeb Rees, and making their film debuts, Rainn Wilson and Justin Long. Today we are talking about the summer movie that wasn't Galaxy Quest.
In the far reaches of the galaxy, a civilization is under siege.
We are all that is left.
They've searched the universe for a leader.
Stay tuned for scenes from next week's Galaxy Quest.
Never give up, never surrender.
He will save us.
What they got.
Never give up and never surrender.
Were struggling TV actors.
You are our last hope.
Where's my limo?
Okie dokie.
And they're about to put on a command performance 8 million light years away.
We are actors, not astronauts.
You are our protectors.
That was a hell of a thing.
Now,
Laredo, take us out.
You gotta move to the right.
Would you sit your ass down? You wanna drive this to...
acting like heroes.
The whole thing was just a misunderstanding.
May not be enough.
They look like little children. Hi, little guy.
Not bad.
DreamWorks Pictures presents Tim Allen, Sigourney Weaver, Alan Rickman, Galaxy Quest.
You're just gonna have to kill it.
Well, go for the mouth, the throat, his vulnerable spots.
It's a rock, it doesn't have any vulnerable spots!
So, Julia, what's Galaxy Quest about?
In the early 80s, a science fiction TV show called Galaxy Quest followed the crew of a spaceship as they boldly went where no man had gone before. Flash forward to 1999, and the aging cast is reduced to appearing at fan conventions. They are embittered about their faded careers. Only Jason Nesmith, played by Tim Allen, who portrayed the ship's commander, still loves hamming it up for the nerds. His co-stars, including Gwen DeMarco, played by Sigourney Weaver, and the classically trained actor Alexander Dane, played by Alan Rickman, are over the whole thing. They can barely stand Jason's massive ego. Jason also does little cosplay gigs on the side, and he thinks he's doing one of these gigs for a particularly odd group of fans. But he discovers that these oddballs are actually real aliens called Thermians. The sweet, naive Thermians have received transmissions of Galaxy Quest and believe that they are historical documents. They have modeled their whole society on the show's idealistic values of courage and teamwork. They have also built a real working version of the show's spaceship, the NSEA Protector. They want Jason's help to defeat the evil alien Saris. Jason, longing for the chance to be a real-life hero, convinces his reluctant castmates to join him on this adventure. They are also joined by a glorified extra from the show who is literally called Guy and is played by Sam Rockwell. All the actors must learn to use the space technologies that they only pretended to use on the show. After some battles and close calls, Saris captures the ship and sets it to self-destruct. With the help of an extremely knowledgeable fan, played by Justin Long, Jason saves the day by activating the mysterious Omega-13 device. The actors crash land into a fan convention and are greeted with even more of a hero's welcome than they usually get. Galaxy Quest gets rebooted with slightly better hair and slightly bigger boobs, and with Guy as a part of the regular cast.
1999 was perhaps the most consequential year of star Tim Allen's professional career. It was the year his decade-defining family sitcom Home Improvement came to a close, and he starred in two of the best-reviewed comedy films of the year, weirdly playing a guy who is a spaceman, but not really, in both Galaxy Quest and Toy Story 2. Galaxy Quest was a modest hit, opening at number 4 behind The Talented Mr. Ripley, debuting at number 1, and Any Given Sunday and The Green Mile coming in at 2nd and 3rd, respectively. But it would go on to gross over $70 million domestically and $90 million worldwide on a $45 million budget. It has since gone on to become an absolute cult classic. It was also very well reviewed by critics, certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes with a score of 90 and holding a Metacritic score of 70. The most enthusiastic review came from the San Francisco Chronicle's Mike LaSalle, who wrote, quote, Galaxy Quest has many comic elements, but it's the adventure story that brings them together. After all, to successfully parody Star Trek for almost 2 hours, one must ground the parody in a respectable Star Trek episode, and that's precisely what Galaxy Quest does. As delightful and clever as it is, when the final intergalactic battle begins, one does find oneself concerned about the captain, the crew, and the state of the universe. That's how it should be. In a more measured review, Joe Lydon in Variety wrote, quote, you don't have to be an ardent Trekkie to fully appreciate Galaxy Quest, but your enjoyment of the comedy will increase in direct proportion to your familiarity with the cliches and conventions that the screenwriters affectionately spoof. In addition to the running gags and the high mortality rate among bit players cast as unnamed crew members, there are cheeky jokes about pinch penny set designs, absurdly booby-trapped tunnels and air ducts, and distant planets where human visitors conveniently find all the oxygen they need to breathe. And in the New York Times, Lawrence Van Gelder wrote, quote, whether you love Star Trek or laugh at it, your starship is about to come in, docking in the form of Galaxy Quest, an amiable comedy that simultaneously manages to spoof these popular futuristic space adventures and replicate the very elements that have made them so durable. But out of the handful of detractors was Times' Richard Corliss, who concluded, quote, in this space epic, no one will hear you laugh. So, Julia, who is joining us to talk about Galaxy Quest?
We have with us today Annie Berke. Annie is a culture writer, a television scholar, and the film and television editor at the Los Angeles Review of Books. For our listeners, I would especially recommend a piece she wrote for LA Review of Books, which is about the 20th anniversary of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and which is a really thoughtful piece about what it means to rewatch the movies we loved. On a personal note, I will say that Annie is one of the best editors I've ever worked with. But Annie, why don't you tell us what else we should know about you?
Oh gosh, that's really nice. Thank you, Julia. Yeah, well, I'm an editor there. I wrote a book about 50s television that came out in 2022 about women writers in 50s TV. There were women writers for Star Trek, but that's a little bit outside the purview. And I love working with writers who have strong, sort of offbeat arguments about culture. Now, I used to do just film and TV. Now I've expanded to all kinds of humanities. So keep reading the site and look for my work. I've written reviews in places like the New Republic, the Washington Post, and the Yale Review. Thank you so much for having me. I am an elder millennial, and you've covered so many great movies, but I feel lucky that no one had seized up Galaxy Quest yet.
This is one that when the podcast was when we were sort of designing it years ago, me and Joey, and we were talking about like, well, if we only do like 9 episodes of this, like what are the movies that we're gonna cover? We've done a lot more than 9 episodes now, but
Yeah.
we were like, if we only do like nine or 10, and we picked 9 because it's 99, and we're being clever about it, and then we were like, and then what if we only do 18? Like what? So what are the movies going to be? And it was a really, really hard list to come up with. And 2 of the movies that we've recently covered, well, this one and then Austin Powers, were like kind of on the cutting room floor. Like they were the ones that just didn't quite make the cut. Definitely could have made the cut. It was kind of an arbitrary decision when it kind of came down to it. But we had Toy Story 2 on that list. And so like Tim Allen as a fake spaceman was already taken, I guess.
Yeah.
But so then, we went several years and just kind of never quite came around back around to Austin Powers and Galaxy Quest, and decided that we would do a summer of fun, lighthearted, comedic-ish or like action-oriented movies, and it seemed like a really good time to come back to this one. So you did kind of request this. You were happy to jump on top of it. So tell us about your history and love of Galaxy Quest.
Well, I would say, I mean, I just watched a documentary from which I will be pulling a lot of the trivia I know about this movie called Never Surrender, which is about Galaxy Quest. And I will say that I don't feel like I am a fan anymore now that I've encountered the people in that movie who dress up as the Thermians and go to conventions. I don't, maybe I'm not. I just liked it. I liked it when I saw it in 1999, and I thought, yeah, I think I want to watch that again. I like about it. I mean, I really approached it from a comedy nerd point of view.
Yeah.
Um, Seeing Tim Allen as one kind of comedian, Tony Shaloub as sort of having a very different approach and persona. And of course, Alan Rickman, who you don't think of as a comedian at all, but turns in one of the most sort of dazzling comic performances, completely straight. Getting to see Sigourney Weaver sort of play her sci-fi action figure, or put it on its head. So I saw it more as a comedy, and also as someone who is like sort of a writer about media, but like a scholar of television. I love when movies are about TV and when TV is about movies. So I've just finished watching The Studio, and I like to see sort of what these forms have to say about each other. There's like, usually some degree of competition or scorn happening between the two, or jealousy sometimes when TV is looking at movies. And so I wanted to look back at it from that place because I hadn't seen it since I did, my qualifying exams in graduate school and reading about sort of intertextuality and medium specificity and media competition. So that's what I came to it with. But I realize now, and maybe should have seen coming, that this is a very beloved Trekkie artifact. Will Wheaton, who was in one of the Star Treks, but I know from Big Bang Theory, said that it's the best Star Trek movie. And I'd believe him because the only ones I saw are with Chris Pine. And that's fine, but somehow doesn't feel like the purest take on the Star Trek film.
Oh man, we could have so that's a debate worth having. I would concede that on some level it's one of the best Star Trek movies. But we can talk a little bit more about that later. I think Julia is our Trekkiest of the three of us right now. And we'll get into that in a moment as well. But I do want to there's one point that you made that I think is a really, really good one, which is that one of the great things about this movie that like really shouldn't work but very much does is that there are kind of competing forms of comedy happening at the same time, and it's like that messiness that is also like part of what makes sort of Star Trek and sort of these kind of post Star Trek kind of 80s and 90s sci-fi shows like kind of enduring. And I also, like, as someone who is I have a very hard time, I've talked about this before, but I have a very hard time like finding 90-minute comedies to be funny all the way through. And even something as like wonderful as Office Space, like I get a little burnt out on it after about 60 minutes. But this is a movie that like all these years later, the comedy has aged really well. I still was like laughing out loud to myself while watching it. And it is a perfect comedy insofar as like it gets 90 minutes of comedy out of it. Right. And I think part of the reason is because you do have like what Tony Shaloub is doing against what Alan Rickman is doing against what Tim Allen is doing. And this like really, and also Enrico Colantoni, who's like doing something very different and hilarious. And it's part of what sort of keeps it fresh by kind of playing to the sort of ridiculousness and sort of over the top nature of science fiction television, right? And as far as that goes, it's like very well thought out and using the premise so beautifully, right? That I think that's part of why it's like such a landmark kind of beloved and eminently rewatchable comedy, which you can't say about every comedy out there for sure.
No, and I think it's sort of it's tight and controlled and aesthetically unambitious like a television show or
Yeah.
something. Like where it's like, okay, this happens is like act 1, this happened. Now we're done. Like we're moving on. We're not going to like get bogged down in too much character development. We're also
Yeah.
not going to get I love not all, but many Judd Apatow movies. But the idea that comedies now are getting longer and there's more time to mess around and improvise, I don't feel like there was a lot of improvisation happening there. Or if there was, it was in very brief moments. It feels like this movie is like it's just kind of at a quick clip, and gets the job done. Like to me, like a show, like a
Yeah.
TV show from the 90s where, like commercial break. You could probably put commercial breaks in this one and I'd be like, that seems right. Like, in fact, a special edition of Galaxy Quest with 1999 commercials.
Oh, wow.
I would get that. I would
I
I would
like
special
it.
order that.
I watched it on Pluto, which had commercials, but they weren't
Yeah,
from the
but
90s, which is
no.
unfortunate. So,
No.
All right, so Julia, you are, as we kind of alluded to earlier, you are the Trekkiest, I think, among. We can talk about our Star Trek relationships, I guess, in a second. But like, as someone who has some vocabulary in Star Trek, what's your relationship to this movie?
I had actually not seen this before, and I don't.
Wait,
I
really?
know.
Until like this week?
Yeah, and the
My
crazy
God.
thing is that, like, to the extent I am a sci-fi nerd at all, it's comedy sci-fi. Like I
Mm-hmm.
actually saw Spaceballs before I ever saw Star Wars.
Me too.
Um,
Me too. Yeah.
and that might be an elder millennial thing as well.
It's my
Um, uh, and I loved Hitchhiker's Guide and Red Dwarf and stuff like that. So I don't know how I missed this one, except Annie, I'll leave you to talk about the documentary, but they do mention that it kind of got, for various reasons, marketed as a children's movie. And so maybe that's why I missed it. But yeah, this was a delight. It's not bogged down in a lot of Star Trek stuff, and I feel like I have just enough exposure to Star Trek where it's kind of like, well, I wonder about this or I wonder about that. But then, like, maybe it would not be as good of a movie and maybe neither of you would like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the things it does really well, and one of the smart things about it, is that it doesn't specifically, like, in the way that you could talk about this as like the Star Trek's Spaceballs, right? Like, it's not just kind of going after Star Trek, right? It is finding something, I think, like the Star Trek stuff is obviously there, and that's kind of its center of gravity. But like, it is also sort of making jabs at, again, all of the sort of 80s and 90s science fiction mid-budget television that sort of was, the product of Star Trek. Like, it's making fun of The Next Generation. It's also making fun of, like, or not making fun of, but like very much kind of paying some sort of, satirical homage to like Sequest DSV, the original Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers, right? And somehow it's finding like some like aesthetic that is common to all of them, and sort of exposing that in a really, really smart way. So I think one of the reasons it works so well is that it's not simply grounded in Star Trek. It's not just mocking the 1960s Star Trek, or sort of just being like this is clearly what we are sort of analogizing here, right? There's a lot that it's found a kind of like, a central sort of theme that it is that it's sending up that makes it sort of work so well, I think.
I agree with you. That kind of message of, of what is the world that you want to escape into, that you don't have to have watched Star Trek to know what it feels like to wish that something that you watched, that you bring into your home every week, really was real. And I think that one of the documentary points they make is that moment where Justin Long's character, the super fan, tells Tim Allen's character, tells the captain, I know it's not real. And Tim Allen says, "Yes, it is real, Captain Nez." And he goes, "I knew it." And I think that everyone has that world. I am unfortunately immune to it. I feel like I didn't get into sci-fi, and I never understood Harry Potter. So I feel like the culture finally came around. I've been waiting, but it wasn't for the right reasons. I just never wanted to go to magic school. I was like, why? And it just seems like either you're mad. Why do you go to boarding school? Whatever. So like, I'm just immune to certain joys. I don't like books that have maps at the front. I'm always like, I don't understand. I have to learn a whole geography now. Like, there's new languages. They're not real. I just rewatched a rom-com spoof, if you ever do a podcast, about 2014 called They Came Together.
Oh yeah.
And one
Great
of
movie.
the Ed Helms character, who's like the guy she's not supposed to be with, he doesn't read fiction. He says, it's not true, right? And that's how I feel about a lot of sci-fi. I'll be like, it's not real. Like, you can learn all those facts and they're not even true. But everyone has their Star Trek. And I also think that just like the way that we saw Spaceballs before we saw Star Wars, there's certain sort of combined the look and sort of the moral behind it. You get that just through the ether, like the way that we know the story of Romeo and Juliet before you read it in school.
Yeah.
I've seen I haven't watched The Next Generation or anything, but I've seen Galaxy Quest and I've seen Black Mirror, and I feel like I know the light and the dark of what Star Trek is. But
with Callister, right? Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
So I feel like there are certain sort of cultural inheritances we just get. They're pop culture references, but they're more than that. They're not just references. Um, so I think that in that sense, it is accessible to everyone. But
Yeah.
I agree. I agree that you probably get even more out of it if you are a Trekkie. Like, I forget which critic you just said that. Was it Roper or someone else?
No, it was the Tribune, I think.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it was Joe Lydon in
Right.
Variety. Yeah.
Well, because you have that affection, and it's clear the film has like a real love of the show and the franchise and the fans, of course.
Yeah, I kind of have the opinion that like you don't need to know the thing well to appreciate a good parody, because like there's something about the form, like you have to be so meticulous about form and about humor that like if it's a well-made parody, I don't think you need really that much familiarity with the original text to kind of get to enjoy it or to like get the lay of the land.
And it's a movie about how made up stories can have something true to them. So that's kind of a universal message. It's not a particularly Star Trek sort of moral or takeaway. The idea that like an actor is lying, but also through lying you reveal something fundamentally true and good. And it almost feels like a very 90s message, as now that I say it out loud. Is
Yeah.
kind of like,
Yeah, that's true.
pretending your way into the heart of it. I don't know. I have to go through the list of the films you talked about. How many of them have that exact same moral? They pretended to be in love and now they are, or they like acted like they were the president and then they were turned out they were the best president.
It is kind of what it's at the heart of Toy Story, right? Like
Yeah.
that's
Toys that become
basically
real because you love them, Velveteen Rabbit style.
Yeah, and like Buzz Lightyear becoming, a real action hero because like he wants to be, right? And like he believes in the fact that he is. And again, it's a weird like maybe it's a Tim Allen movie thing, like believe that you're Santa Claus and you will be. I don't know. Maybe that's the thread across all of Tim Allen's cinematic career. Not really sure.
Fake it till you make it. The Tim Allen story.
Exactly right. Yeah, and I think like the thing uniquely about Star Trek as well is that like I've never been a fan of the '60s series. A lot of that I think is just kind of cultural bias. Like I was born in the UK, and so like Doctor Who is in my DNA. But like and so like I never really inherited a cultural love of the '60s Star Trek. But certainly when I was I think Next Generation started when I was like 10 or so. And so that was big when I was in my kind of formative sci-fi years. And so that I much more identify with the Next Generation. Also like the Star Trek movies, like Star Trek 2, 3, and 4, especially. And like I saw 4 in the theaters. So there's so much Star Trek that I think that there's a lot of entry points for people, which is one of the reasons why I think this movie can work if because I think you can sort of get into Star Trek from a whole bunch of different sort of vantage points. But I also think like you would get this movie if you watched like Sequest in the early 90s as well. Like I think there's a lot that it's so like it finds something that is so sort of like this kind of glowing orb within a sort of sci-fi subculture. And interestingly in a way that like predates where we are today. Like what I think is so interesting about the timing of this movie is that Comic-Con was not a cultural phenomenon the way that it is today. This is the year that The Phantom Menace came out, and The Phantom Menace really is a moment in sort of like shifting forward the wide mass popularity of sci-fi and sort of nerd like sci-fi and comic book conventions. That the kind of convention that you're seeing in the beginning was like very niche in terms of the sorts of people who like go to it. And now it's like so recognizable as a massive part of our culture. I think one of the reasons why this movie like stands up so well is that you can watch it today and it feels very modern. It feels very like of the moment still, because that sort of like sci-fi nerd subculture is now the culture. It's now just pop culture. And that was not the case 25 years ago. Like this is really kind of oddly prescient in sort of seeing where this was going. This was a very specific nerd subculture that would not have necessarily like appealed to a huge audience, which is maybe why it became more of a cult film than initially massive film. And we can talk about also like its release and marketing and all that sort of thing. Julie, you mentioned that before, and I want to get back to that in a second. But yeah,
well, I wonder what will happen if there wasn't momentum for a sequel, like a follow-up television show.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was a movie, but I think they wanted to do a show. I've heard both. But that the project kind of stalled because Alan Rickman passed away in 2016, and that he was meant to be one of the major characters in the relationship between Nesbitt and Nesbitt and Dane. Now I think I'm mixing up the actor and the character names right now.
Nesbitt is
Jason
Alan and Dane is Alan Rickman.
Yes, but then there's the characters' names that they play.
Right.
I wrote this
Captain
down.
Taggart.
Captain Taggart. Nesmith is the actor's and is Tim Allen's character, and then Nesbitt's character's name is Taggart. Yes, so it was between Dane and Nesmith, but they would have to sort of rejigger that. I will just pitch for the future if they did decide to go back, they should jump ahead. And I think that Nesmith and DeMarco got married, and maybe their marriage is stalling. Have a kind of like date night, like Faye and Carell sort of thing, where they have to reignite their marriage.
Yeah, I like it.
That's what I would.
Oh, I like that.
Pitch. I really love the idea of Rickman, but since that's not a possibility, that could be the core relationship. She doesn't really have a lot to do in this movie. That's the joke, but it's also true. The joke is that Tawny Madison doesn't have anything to do, and you could say it's like a sly comment that they also give Gwen DeMarco nothing to do. It's not the best commentary by just also giving her nothing to do.
I do think that she was like her professionalism. She says like, I have one job to do and it's stupid.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yes.
It's stupid.
And her just kind of incredulity at like all the the like booby traps they have to go through for no reason, just because somebody thought it'd be cool to have like chompers
Yes.
in a hallway.
I'm not trying to be a feminist killjoy, but I will be it. I'm just saying I think one thing that would be different if you made this movie today, I don't think that those two would kiss at the end based on the movie that has come before. Because you're like, they're not really. He hasn't really won her back. Like, they don't really have a relationship yet. I feel like he would try to kiss her and she'd be like, mm-mm. Like, that would be
Yeah,
the 2025 version of that would not end in a romance quite that way.
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I was wondering, was if that was in the like PG-13 version of this movie, and
Oh, good
it
point.
it got cut out, and it's just like I have mixed feelings about like her role getting smaller versus her
Yeah.
having to do the like uh Star Trek TOS
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
horny space babe with the bouffant, you know.
Yeah, no, I don't know that part. I feel like I only know what I've read, and I don't think I've encountered anywhere what got removed, although it's very obvious in that one moment where there's the booby-trapped hallway that she is not saying screw that, and they don't cover it up at all,
Yeah.
which is great.
And
Yeah.
Sigourney Weaver was so mad that they changed that line, that she like deliberately dubbed it over in a way that would not look authentic,
Oh,
right? Like,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And
Do
she's
would
I love Sigourney Weaver in this. Like, I think I love that the way that she's used, even though like it's a weird thing because, right, the whole point is the character like is underused, right, and that is the joke. But I like that she basically is like the fourth wall breaker,
Mhm.
right? Like, she's the one who's kind of like speaking on behalf of the audience and like the sense of absurdity, right, and just like how
Mhm.
ridiculous this whole thing is, and her kind of playing like straight man comedy, like really, and
Yes.
it's really great. And then also, like, you know, like, she's really hot in
She is,
this,
yeah.
and like that
I
doesn't hurt.
don't wanna take anything away from her performance, which I
No,
think
and
is
she
great.
actually, like, she's not like, if you thought Sigourney Weaver was hot in this movie, like, you're not alone, because so did she. Like, apparently she went back to the hotel every night, like, in costume, because she just wanted to like admire herself in the mirror. And the way they made her look in this movie. So
Mm.
I think that's quite funny. I also like the idea. I love your pitch for a sequel. I have thought about this as I started looking into the, I didn't know that there was any sort of rumbling about a sequel at all. I think you clearly, what you do is make it so that Sam Rockwell's character has
Mm.
emerged in the last 25 years as like the big star of the
You're
whole
right. That's
franchise.
right. That's
And
true.
then you do this thing with this, like, yeah, this romantic, fizzling out that's going on, and then needing to reignite there. I think that's a perfect sort of like, segue into that. But the idea of doing a TV show of this feels a little too like, Street Fighter the movie, the game. Like, it
Mhm.
gets to the point where it's like, wait, you've done this thing where you're sending up a certain thing, and if you then go into making the thing of that thing, then you get to the point where it's much too, you've like exhausted the material too much. So like, it feels like the world of this movie is bigger precisely because it is so authentically playing in a sort of sandbox that already exists, right? And I think a sequel would be great, but we will, apparently it's still in the works, so we will see whether or not that happens.
I'm
But
so excited about that's such a good. So then he could be like they could do like a what do you call it? I'm getting too jazzed. Like a competition between like, this sort of low budget geeky Galaxy Quest franchise, and maybe Sam Rockwell's guy has become like an MCU guy. Like he would be in like the higher budget,
yeah,
fancier, then he would be like slumming to come back to do, he'd feel like he was going beneath him to go back as like a favor to the franchise that built him, but then he would realize that that's the real thing. That's
yeah,
the real stuff. And the
yeah,
other whatever the Marvel pretend thing that we would call it something else. Because we're writing it now. We got it. We're making this podcast is a staking
Yeah,
intellectual property rights.
yeah.
And we're making
yeah.
it.
Well, yeah, and even like,
That's
as
how
I was
this
saying,
works, right?
because this culture has evolved so much in the last 25 years, there's a whole different sort of place to mine for comedy now, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not the same sort of niche convention culture that it used to be. It's a much bigger, right? There is the whole MCU and like Star Wars sequels and TV shows. Like the whole world is different. That it needs a new movie to kind of.
I was wondering about that. Like, could you take it in a really dark direction? Because, like, I was when we were talking about if we made this movie today or whatever, like, would just all the like the Justin Long character instead of being sweet just be totally insufferable? Like,
He would be an incel, probably.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You know, like we're living in this culture where like the nerds have won and like still
And are still mad. No,
Yeah,
some
so
of them
mad.
are not. Some are fine.
Yeah.
Hashtag not all nerds.
And you know, so like having them interact with fans, like that could be a dark, gritty reboot, I guess, maybe.
Well, maybe they need to make the R-rated movie they really wanted to make all along. That would be the follow-up because most of the people who are going to watch it are probably in their 30s and 40s. So maybe they need to make the grown-up one. I have to say the sort of child-friendly version, I didn't have any problem with it. When I was watching it, I didn't feel like they'd cleaned anything up.
I didn't either.
And maybe it's becoming apparent and just like being. I didn't watch this with my son who's too young still, but like, I do think that like I didn't feel like it would pull its punches. I think because I think of Star Trek as fundamentally sort of family friendly entertainment, it didn't seem wrong to make a spoof of it that was also family friendly. But I can understand not
100%.
knowing what was cut, that maybe it was like much edgier and darker and like more to the taste of some of the performers or some of the creative people involved. That said, it's still a little too grown up for most kids that I've met. I don't really think it was a kids movie for people who don't really know kids. Which I think, do you know what I'm like? But my husband and I have talked about this. Like 90s PG doesn't mean anything. Like you could, like 90s PG could be anything from like a bird and a pig that are friends to something just shy of Silence of the Lambs. Could be anywhere in there. You have to Google it if you're going to show your like grade school or something. It's PG from 1995. Could be like there's a brief, like brief scene reminiscent of Deliverance, but the rest is fine. You'd be like, oh my god, why is this in a PG movie? But then when you Google it, it's weird too because you end up on sites that are like people look at one another with desire, and you're like, who wrote this? Like,
there's
it's really hard to see.
There's a whole podcast to be made about like the absurdity of the MPAA during the 1990s, and like we talked about this when we did the South Park episode a long time ago. But famously, one of the ways that they got their R rating was by every time the MPAA said you have to change this and this and this to go from NC-17 to R, they were like, okay. And so they just made everything much worse and then sent another cut back that was like, they added even more offensive jokes. And then they were like, no, not good enough. And so then they would then revert to the one that initially the MPAA was like, this will get NC-17. And they're like, okay, now it's good enough. So to like get the cut they wanted, they just kept making a more offensive movie until they got back to the one that they wanted to get the R rating on. Like it was such an absurd
it's like that old
thing.
Yiddish folktale. It could be worse. The rabbi advises them to bring all the chickens and the geese and like the cow in the house so that when they let them out again, he's like, actually, it wasn't so bad at the beginning. Like it was good just to be with all my noisy children and my angry wife. So yeah, that makes sense. It could have been worse. School of MPAA manipulation.
So if this were an R-rated movie, because I agree with you, Annie, that I didn't really feel the absence of more adult stuff. But if this were an R-rated movie, which is, I think this movie was actually rated PG-13, but it would be Spaceballs, right?
I think it's PG. I think it's PG.
No, I mean, I think Spaceballs was PG-13.
Oh, Spaceballs, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it would if it were more adult, it would be Spaceballs.
It is
right?
PG because I don't even know if PG-13 was in.
The first
Spaceballs
PG-13
is also
movie
PG.
was Red Dawn, so was Spaceballs before Red Dawn? If so, then it was PG.
Red Dawn was 1984, and Spaceballs was 1987.
Yeah.
But I did start watching Spaceballs with my son. There's some bad language in there that I was like, don't say that. It's cool.
My wife was like, as I was watching this last night, my wife was like, is it okay to like, should we show the girls Spaceball? Because the sequel, speaking of Spaceballs, the sequel announcement came out the day before we're recording this.
Yeah.
And my wife was like, would the girls be okay with it? I'm like, no. Like, no. Like, I saw Spaceballs when I was like, I don't know, when it came out. I was like 9 or whatever when it came out, and I saw it in the theater, but like, I shouldn't have. and and like, for sure, no, they're not ready for that. But the thing is, like, my girls, I think, would like Galaxy Quest, but would like a Galaxy Quest sequel that sent up the things that they watch, I think, a lot more, right? Which is why I think it's like we are in a good time. Like, I kept thinking about that. I'm like, would they understand this humor? Like, do they understand the sort of stuff that's being sent up? And I think, like, no. But if there was one that was kind of much more in the vein of paying homage to like the MCU or the more recent sort of Star Wars universe, they would absolutely get that, right? And would appreciate that humor. So,
Well, I think the joke would be that Galaxy Quest is so light and fun and campy, and that so many of the sort of franchises that are popular now are so gritty and dark. I think there
yeah,
could be a lot of fun to be had about, like, Batman, like the kind of like Christopher Nolan, the very dark like visions of
Yeah.
franchise that are not fun and not light,
yeah.
and are sort of striving for prestige, high art status. And like, I mean, who better to make, an impassioned case for the middle brow than Tim Allen, or even lowbrow. I feel like I'm coming
Yeah.
for Tim Allen today. We haven't gotten
Well,
there yet, but I might go for
We
him.
should talk about Tim
yeah.
Allen soon.
Or
Yes.
Shatner, who's like maybe low middle brow or
Yeah. Yeah.
middle low
He,
brow or something.
yes, but he has a good sense of humor about himself, I think.
I think
Sometimes.
I think Alan
I don't
does as well. I think like part of I think there is something why so part of the like the reason why Harold Ramis didn't direct this movie, right? And Harold Ramis was going to direct this movie, and I think it's I love what Parisot does with this, and I'm glad that he was the director. I'm not sure, as much as I love Harold Ramis, that if Harold Ramis directed this, it wouldn't have become a bit too Harold Ramis-y, right? And maybe like the sort of thing that Harold Ramis does, taking over, I think, what is otherwise needs to be kind of a neutrally directed movie in some ways.
Mhm.
So having said that, right, Harold Ramis wanted like Steve Martin to play the character that Alan plays, and I forget who were the other ones. There was a couple other.
Um, Kevin Kline
Kevin Kline,
didn't
who had
want
to turn it
took
down
it
for
to
doing
turn it down.
something else. Maybe he
Um,
Alec
was doing
Baldwin, right?
that
Midsummer.
was my favorite of the people they listed. I think Alec Baldwin would have been really good.
Baldwin would have been really good, but this was before Baldwin was really in his like comedy phase,
That's
right?
true.
He was still the sort of like, and that maybe is part of what would have worked. But I think that like Tim Allen and William Shatner have a lot more like shared DNA as stars and
Mhm.
like the kinds of
Yeah.
people that they are and the careers that they've had, like that it makes a lot more sense. And I think he is perfectly cast, right, as this particular character. It's like part of the reason that it works so well. That almost like, again, almost like if you have an Alec Baldwin, then that kind of takes over the movie. Like
Yeah.
Tim Allen was still a kind of a guy who's like a very, famous TV actor and also the voice of Buzz Lightyear at this point. And also like I'm not sure if the second Santa Claus movie had come out. The first one had, it was like a modest,
Mhm.
sort of similarly sized hit to this. But he's like right in the ballpark of like where you need someone to be to convincingly be a kind of like washed up TV actor,
Yeah.
right? With a cult, sort of fan following. And he makes a ton of sense. We can talk about him as like a person and an actor in a second if you want, but I think it's worth saying, like,
I
impeccably
think I
cast.
bring some of my baggage about the roles that he plays, which is always sort of like the last man standing. Like, no one
Yeah.
is masculine except for me. Everyone keeps trying to take my masculinity away, but I just need to be like, let me be the man I am. And I think it kind of works for Galaxy Quest. But when you put all of those other roles together, start to think, why do you have to be this way about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. That makes sense.
Why do you have to like sort of mythology? I think that, and then there are lots of these things that I could say that are really have nothing to do with Tim Allen at all, and they're just they have nothing. They're just occasioned by me thinking about him and looking at him and thinking about a whole contingent of men who feel like, if you just let me, I would be the captain, and you're like, you are the captain. Like, this is what it looks like to be the captain. It's not that much fun. Like, yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah. Julia, how do you have thoughts on Tim Allen, Julia?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think Annie pretty much summed him up, but I do think he is correct for this role. I
Mhm.
mean, I would have loved to see Baldwin too, but like in terms of that, just like that sort of Shatner-esque, I'm gonna lead with my gut and my braggadocio, and
Mhm.
that's gonna save us. I think that's the right tenor for the role.
I
Um,
I think you're I think Tim Allen, because he plays it straight, there is like a sweetness to the movie that maybe Alec Baldwin wouldn't have brought, because if I look at the role that we know him as, which or as a comedian, which would be Jack on 30 Rock, like he's always kind of a parody of a powerful man. He's never really a powerful man. And so maybe it would be too much like putting a hat on a hat. It would be like too much spoof, like a spoof of the captain in a spoof of a show. The movie itself is kind of a spoof too. It would be like crazy ironies. So I
Yeah.
think you two are right. I just sort of like other actors more.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally fair. Isn't he doing like a new sitcom?
Yes, called Shifting Gears. Yes.
Yes,
I watched
I
the
think
first
it.
one.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I did. I mean, I watched the first one. There have been more
because
than
I
one.
I keep getting the ads on podcasts for some reason. I don't know, maybe
Really?
because
Yeah.
I watch television, and that's
It's
just
Interesting.
Trump coded. I don't There's
yeah,
no
Of
better
course.
way to put it. Like, um, from what like they don't say it in the first one, but like, his daughter moves in with him with her kids because she's like a broken marriage and she needs some place to stay.
She's
And like
awoke.
it's like we don't talk,
Yeah.
turn off the news when my kids are in the room kind of thing. And you're like, oh, like um oh, so relatable. It's supposed to be so relatable, but I was like, turn off. Like, no, no.
yeah.
I don't need an all in the family. And if I did, it would need to be like
Gerard Carmichael.
funnier, better. Yeah, exactly. Um,
Yeah.
so that's yes, but it's of a piece. I think it's not a show that is, it's not a show that you would put on Newsmax or something. It's not very, very loudly political that way, but you know what it means. We all know what it means.
I mean, I'm so torn about this. It's hard for me to like. I mean, Tim Allen obviously is someone with a very messy background, even at this point, right? And he was at this point in his life was trying to kind of put it all together or like be
Yeah.
respectable after having served time in prison for like drug dealing and all that sort of thing. Um, and I grew up like I was right in the wheelhouse of people for whom like Home Improvement was made, and I still think that Home Improvement is a like one of the great American sitcoms sort of like
Mhm.
ever made, and b just so perfectly captures like 90s suburban family life culture, right, in a way that looking back on it now, like it really is a combination both of like nostalgia plus really like tapping into something that was. I just don't think there's another like 90s sitcom, family sitcom that comes close to like being as iconic towards the 90s as that is. And I think Alan was a really talented comedic actor, and Home Improvement ended, and this is his moment where he's trying to transition into some other kind of career that just never happened. Largely, I think, because of a lot of like poor choices being made by him or his agent for like the kind of movies that he made afterwards. But like also because I think what Galaxy Quest kind of exposes about Tim Allen is that this is sort of it's sort of a weirdly like a reflection on his career before it even happened,
Oh.
because like
Mm.
he's not like Tim Allen's not attractive, like he's not like he's like charming and sort of like but he's not like Alec Baldwin, right? And like that's part of kind of why this works, that he is sort of like mid in the way
But
that,
you know who
you
else
know.
he isn't, but has a lot in common is he's not Ray Romano either.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
Ray Romano has gone down some dark alleyways in his He's going
He
to some
has.
serious dark places, and I don't think Tim Allen ever wanted to do that, as far as I could tell.
I
Or
don't
if
think
he
so
did,
either.
that no one wanted him to, and I don't
Right.
know why. I don't know why they wouldn't want him to necessarily, and would want Ray Romano, or it's just different moments, like 10
Yeah.
years difference. That there's this sense of like sitcom actors who go dark, they break bad, whereas he was a little bit pigeonholed. I couldn't tell like whether he really, or he's just this was sort of in the documentary about it, they sort of talk. Steven Spielberg saw Tim Allen
Yeah.
do the scene where he's explaining that he's an actor and that this is a lie, but they didn't mean it to hurt anyone, and that was a great, that Spielberg is like tells him it's a great performance, and Allen seems like embarrassed and nervous at that compliment. But also it's included in the documentary, so it's not like a secret that
Right.
this
Right.
exchange happened. But the way they talk about it, it sort of feels like they were like, there's an implicit understanding that this sort of hit the limit of Tim Allen's acting ability.
Yeah.
I don't mean
I
that
think
in a
that's
mean
right.
way, but like that he's not like, and now I'm going to be, now I'm going to do, I don't even know, like men of a certain age. I'm trying to think like what Ray Romano does, where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
we're in dramedy territory. Just very hard to imagine.
Yeah. And for a guy who like has been to prison and sold drugs, like you'd think he would have darker places to go, but like I
Maybe
don't
that's
know,
why he doesn't.
maybe maybe that is the case. Maybe it does hit a little too close to home. Yeah, I mean it saddens me that he is like a reputation for being abusive on set, and like
Yeah.
that he's kind of a mess, and that he's a trumper, and like all of us, it all sucks because there is just something, I don't know what it is. I watched the like Santa Claus TV show with my kids, and we loved it. There is just something like endlessly appealing about Tim Allen. And there's also just something about his personality as a real life figure and his choices that make him also just kind of, again, very limited in his appeal. And that sort of sucks, but like that's also, I think, why this particular character works so perfectly, because it really just is kind of, this is who Tim Allen is, and this is a role kind of tailor made for him. So yeah, I don't know.
Something that they said about his character that I think is really in the backstory of this movie is that originally when it was, I mean, the story of the screenwriting is not super. It's one of those stories where somebody wrote a script and then they bought it and changed everything, which is
Yes.
not like,
It's the story,
I don't know, it's not
Pretty
like the
Woman
kind of
story all over
dream
again.
come true kind of Hollywood tale you like to hear, because I always think
No.
that poor guy who's had an idea and they were like, cool, we'll pay for that idea, and then we're just like gonna gut your
So you
script.
don't sue us when
But
we make something totally
yeah,
different with like
I'll,
nuggets of it right. Yeah.
right. But that originally that character, Nesmith, like hated being the captain. He wanted to separate from the show, and he got angry when people would bring it up. And that one of the changes they made that like opened up the story in such a great way was that they made, instead of the captain, the actor wanting to distance himself from the role, that he was someone who wanted to be the guy, wished that he could really be the captain of a starship, and loved being at these fan conventions. And I'm wondering what you two thought of that, because I can see both being different movies, but why is it that it works so much better? Is it because it's a movie about fandom, or is it because Tim Allen deep down seems like he wants to have a good time, like he's a good time guy? But it struck me because sometimes I think the idea that he would hate the role seems like maybe the more obvious choice. And then it surprised me in a way that I'd be like, oh, yeah, I would not have thought that as someone who thinks about the way stories are put together. I wouldn't have thought like, oh, a character who like that would seem like less conflict, but it actually works better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think it was a surprising choice for me too. But it kind of made sense to me on a kind of logical, real world level in terms of like, oh, these were the glory days for him. This is when he was high on
Yeah.
the hog and he just wants to go back there. But there's this more like juvenile quality to it where it's just like he really wants to be a space hero in space, and like he gets the chance to do that.
Yeah.
Um
And he's not
I
Alan Rickman's character. He doesn't have real acting aspirations.
yeah, exactly. And I do think the person who hates the role and resents it and doesn't want to say the lines ever like has to be the British character actor, the acclaimed British theater actor who
Yeah.
gets put on the sci-fi show. Like it's appropriate that that's the character who hates it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the really insightful things about this movie is exactly that. Like, it reminded me, Julia, when we were talking about Val Kilmer and his documentary, where he talks about how he realized that he wanted to be Batman, not play Batman, and like that his life's goal was really just to be Batman, and playing Batman's a different beast. That there is something like this movie, sort of one of the reasons it's kind of perfect is not only is it a great comedy, but every great comedy needs to have a sort of like revelation about humanity underneath it, right? And I think this movie so joyfully sort of explores that idea of like the inherent conflict between, we all love this genre, we all like want to be the space captain and like fly around on spaceships and all that sort of thing, but there's something like depressing about pretending to do it over and over and over again for years that gets reignited when it becomes like real again, and like you get to like actually be in outer space and doing all the things that like this, you know, alien race specifically created this world based on your TV show because it thought it was real, and so you are literally like living out the dream as opposed to like plywood, you know, sets and bad lighting and whatever else. And I think there's something really like that's sort of it, like that's sort of where the wonder lies, is like trying to find that space between um suspension of disbelief and like engaging in the fantasy, and that all these people who go to these conventions in cosplay or whatever else, like they only get to engage in the fantasy in like a very short period of time, right? Once or twice a year or whatever it is, whereas these actors have to just like adhere to that all the time, and there's a sort of, you know, there's something tiring and grating about having to do that, but you still deep down really also want to be as enthusiastic about this property as everybody else is, right? So like I think that's a really, you know, I think a lot of people around this time, especially with Star Trek conventions, like that was kind of starting to happen to a lot of these actors, and like, you know, Alec Guinness being like Star Wars sucks, and you know, and it, like people being like, no, Obi-Wan Kenobi, don't say that, right? It's a really, it's a really, this dynamic is really interesting, and I think is even more relevant today than it was then. But I love that it explores it in a way that is very pure and sort of, you know, sweet and and not condescendingly funny, like all at the same time. It's kind of something of a miracle that this movie pulls off this tone and like walks this line so perfectly well.
Well, I think I mean, I have such an ability to go cynical right now. I don't know. I think it
Yeah.
must just be the things that pop up on my phone every 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But the idea that like you can just trick people into thinking that you're something that you're not, and then they'll follow you, feels like, I don't want that story right now. Um, if you play
Hey,
a
why? I
millionaire
wonder
on
why.
television, are you a millionaire now? Should you treat the country like a business? But I mean, it's not an exclusively 90s problem. It's not just a Trump problem. My family and I, we just watched G20 not long ago, and that's sort of the story about a woman who like isn't she sort of gets to be the president on what she feels like is sort of a mythology around her, and she gets this opportunity. I feel like it's a companion piece in a way to this one, like an updated version where she gets to become the hero that everyone thought she was when they elected her. And so I think there's something dark to me about the idea of like you can trick people and then it's okay and then you're in control of them. But then there's something beautiful about the idea that then you feel a real sense of responsibility. And that I think is Nesmith's journey. And that's what makes the performance so meaningful. And like it makes it my favorite Tim Allen performance with, you know, maybe tied with Buzz Lightyear, who it's great. But um, but this idea that, you know, at the beginning, maybe I'm doing too close a read, but when he's in the car with the aliens and he sees the girl alien and he's clearly going to try to sleep with her, or he's hitting on her because that's probably what he does whenever he does these kinds of conventions. He finds one of the female handlers, one of the women fans, and he like beds her. And that's very obvious what he's doing. But somehow once he becomes the captain, he stops. I mean, they're trying to live, but like, so it's not like there's a lot of time for that, but um, he becomes a different person because they expect and need from him to
Yeah.
actually be a hero. And that's what's so nice about the movie, because I do think that there's ways that I could look at this plot and be like, oh no, because looking at cultural artifacts and being like, how did we get here, is very, especially for is very a near and dear hobby to my heart lately, especially when I'm looking at things from my own youth, where I'll be like, what happened? Like, what was I ingesting in this time that now we're in 2025? Um, but I think Galaxy Quest might be one of the good ones. Yeah, I put air quotes. One of the
Yeah, well, I think like part of that has to do with parodying or honoring Star Trek specifically, right? Because it does have this very aspirational, and like Gene Roddenberry had this like secular humanism that he really believed in, and like you're supposed to go to other, planets and live in harmony and try and get along with people who are not like you. And like I
Yeah.
think that all seems like, I mean, that to be honest was what did appeal to me about Star Trek, to the extent that I am a Star Trek watcher.
Yeah.
But it does all seem very Pollyanna-ish today. But I think like because there is a kind of that kind of ethos behind the thing itself, that like you can get away with it a little more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I also want to talk before we. There's a couple of things I really want to get to before we wrap up here. So I want to talk really briefly about the Enrico Colantoni and just the the way that the sort of alien race is envisioned, and this is another thing where it's sort of like one of the glories of this movie is that it does so understand kind of the subculture, and has these like little nods to things that are so sort of like deep down that they thought it through is quite wonderful. Like, so I love that they understood that the idea of what's the name of it? I keep wanting to call them the Thessalonians, but I know that's not right.
Thermians?
The Thermians.
It's like they're warm. They're warm-hearted aliens. Thermians.
The Thermians. That they are this kind of like, this like B movie 1950s like alien race who talk like this, and like
Those poor people.
And
Gilligan's
also
Island joke, yeah.
And all, yeah, those poor people. But then also like they're sort of the Star Trek idea of an alien race, but then also because you're talking to an audience from 1999, they're actually these like weird glob people who only appear that way through these like translation matrices or whatever it is, right? And I think that's very clever. I also love, I didn't realize this, that their walk was inspired by like Jerry Anderson marionettes, which is also a very like 1960s sci-fi subculture thing to do. So specifically, they were inspired by Fireball XL5, which is one of the earlier Jerry Anderson shows. Jerry Anderson did Stingray and Captain Scarlet and Thunderbirds, and so like the way that they're sort of like they sort of jitter along like they're being pulled by marionette strings as they're walking, right? Is like they're imitating the movement of Jerry Anderson puppets, which I think is like genius, because I knew I kind of like recognized how they were moving, and until I found out that was what the inspiration was, I'm like, that's a really clever way of adding in this other very sort of niche 1960s science fiction genre, right, without being sort of over the top about it. But I've always remembered Sam Rockwell's performance, and this has always stood out to me, but like rewatching it now, the things that make me laugh the most are Tony Shaloub, in large part because I know who Tony Shaloub is now. Like, it's funnier in retrospect. And also that his character and actor's name are both Asian, which I think is genius.
Yep.
And Enrico Colantoni, who's like over the top crazy voice and performance, is just so perfectly pitched to like just not be over the top enough that it's still like, it's not grating, it's just fucking funny. And that is a really difficult tightrope to walk, and he walks that tightrope so beautifully. But yeah, the idea that what's the name of that? I'm trying to remember the name of the character that Tony Shalhoub plays. Last name is like Chan.
Mm-hmm.
And then his actor's last name is
Kwan.
Fred Kwan, yeah.
And
which I think is also like it's very Star Trek, but it's also like a reflection of what Tony Shalhoub's actual career was like up to this point, right? In terms of
just like playing the character of color, whoever they needed him to be.
It's just such a great in joke, and also because like the way that George Takei was playing a Chinese character while being Japanese, like it's this like very specific kind of joke about the way that sci-fi casting used to work that I think is just so inspired and genius. And that he's also like playing the stoner character, and like, I don't know, it's all so well so well tweaked.
I was so puzzled by like the first couple of minutes of his performance. I was like, where is Tony Shalhoub where has he gone? And so I started to look up Galaxy Quest Tony Shalhoub, and automatically it sort of autofills like stoned. Looked at, oh, he's playing
And
it
the
as a
makeup,
stoner.
when you're seeing the original series, like the makeup that he has on, that like weird, oh my god, it's the look on his in his eyes as he like looks at the camera. It's so good. It's so
I
good.
love the line where like Alan Rickman and Tim Allen have like tricked the through their acting have tricked the bad guys into the airlock, and
Yeah.
Tony Shalhoub says like, the door stuck a little, I'll get my guys up here with some WD-40.
Now, I knew Tony, like, I feel like this is one of my favorite things about 90s ensemble movies is you see these actors who went on to do who just became much bigger stars
Yeah.
in the 2000s and beyond. And I know I like trying to think back to like if I knew them when I watched this when I was 14. I knew Tony Shalhoub from a sitcom called Wings, where he played an Italian named Antonio. And I don't think I would have known Sam Rockwell because I think he was sort of at the beginning of his career. I know he was in The Green Mile, and that supposedly he said he only took this role because he wanted to show people what else he could do beside The Green Mile.
Because Kevin Spacey talked him into it. The one good thing Kevin
that's
Spacey
good
ever
idea.
done.
He leaves that out of the story.
Yeah.
Way to bring down the story.
Yeah.
Drop in Kevin Spacey.
I could not say it. Like, I had to point that out.
But I do have a very strong memory of seeing Sam Rockwell the following year in Charlie's Angels.
I was going to say,
dances, and he dances, and I think he danced in every movie afterward. They always make some time for him to dance because he's an incredible dancer. It makes absolutely no sense in the context of Charlie's Angels. He's like, you know, it's like the Bond villain where they're like, let me take this time to explain to you what I'm going to do to you so that there's time for you to escape. It's a similar thing. He's, you know, he needs to just make an escape, but he's like, but first, Sam Rockwell dance, and you're like, that's amazing. Like, his dance is so good it justifies whatever nonsense narrative reason he should or shouldn't actually be dancing.
Absolutely.
But he's not. But he's very much a romantic lead, anti-romantic lead in Charlie's Angels, and in this movie he dials back the sex appeal. Let's put it that way, as Guy. So respect to that. And Justin,
how about that mustache he has at the end, though?
Yeah, you're right. I take it all back. And Justin Long, this movie, seeing him, I have to say, not just seeing him in the movie, but seeing him interviewed about the movie and the documentary really made me think that I mean, I always liked Justin Long, but I think that he's doing like impersonation. He's trying to be Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future. He's doing a Michael J. Fox impression in some of the lines. And I think that Justin Long is he's sort of typecast, but he's also such a good actor that I really just thought that was him.
Yeah.
And now I'm realizing that that's really not, he's just a person who plays a nerd a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think actually he is a nerd. I think he's like an actor who knows what movie nerds act like.
I think that's right. Yeah.
He might actually be a little bit of a nerd, but if you know what I mean, for some reason I've always thought that like if you'd had to come up with a backstory for Justin Long, I would have been like, they found him on the street being a nerd and they were like, come here, you're gonna be a new girl too. Like you can be in everything, being yourself. But no.
Well, speaking of 90s and sitcoms, by the way, his mom is Susan from Seinfeld. So,
yes, I knew that face. I had to look it up because I was like, who is that?
Yeah. The only other thing that I would know her from ever. Rockwell, so like, again, this is one of the reasons why it's worth going back and watching this movie again, because Rockwell really did suck a lot of the oxygen out of this movie. I mean, not like in terms of the movie, but in terms of the way people talked about it, right? Because he was a pretty unknown figure at the time. He had done, so he did this, Green Mile, and Midsummer Night's Dream, all in '99. So it was a pretty big year for him. But this was kind of his, Sam Rockwell is like career kind of supporting actor guy breakthrough, and people were like, "Who is this guy?" And he's so goddamn funny. And he is great. And again, knowing who Sam Rockwell turned out to be, sort of retrospectively now, it's like fun to go back and look at this movie. But I think because you had Tony Shalhoub from Wings, and you had Enrico Colantoni from Just Shoot Me, and like and you have all these sitcom actors, and like we all get the joke of Sigourney Weaver and Alan Rickman, like stunt casting, whatever. By the way, Darryl Mitchell, we should talk about as well. It's really funny in this movie.
From the 90s show Ed, also the epitome of human goodness, a man who moves back to his hometown to practice good guy law.
Yep.
I think that's what they call it, good guy law. I loved that show.
And also from 10 Things I Hate About You, right? That's speaking of 1999 iconography. But yeah, like Rockwell is great, but I feel like he was so revelatory at the time that people overlooked the greatness of the other comedic performances in this, right? And like I think that's kind of why it's worth kind of going back and remembering it's not just like this is a movie that is funny and also Sam Rockwell's amazing. All of that's true. Like every person in this movie is very, very good and very, very funny. There is not a unfunny, weak performance here.
Yes, justice for Patrick Breen. I was going to say the character
Breen as well. Yes,
who plays. I'm blanking on his Quillick. He's the one who dies and then gets Alan Rick gets Dane to say his grab those hammer. Like he finally justifies that line. Like that's such a good payoff.
It's a great moment.
But I love that it's so sad, but it's also really funny that he says that line and like the look on his face, his like giddy face as he's dying is like it's the look that you would give if your favorite actor in the whole world said something to you. Like that's the expression, right? You're like, oh my God, if Sam Rockwell would do a dance for me, I would literally die. Like he has the I would literally die face, and then he literally dies.
Yeah.
And
Missy Pyle
really
too,
like
there's not every time she's on screen, it's just like her appearance is funny. She gets a ton of laughs without ever saying a word. It is it's great. Jeb Rees, like all across the board, this is a brilliantly performed movie, and that's one of the reasons it works so well. Like nobody doesn't get the joke, and nobody's holding back, right? In the best possible way, which is awesome. And great to see. I do want to, I know there's like the IMDb trivia page to this is just insane. It just goes on forever. And I know there's a lot in the documentary and all that sort of thing. And we can talk about a few things that maybe we haven't gotten to yet. But I do want to talk like one real quick thing, which is that, it's almost we kind of discussed this already, but like the fact that it's PG and that it didn't take the dark turn and isn't an R movie and isn't PG-13, like there is something wonderful about it. But the reason that is the case, and the reason that this isn't a summer movie when it obviously should have been, was because DreamWorks wanted a movie to compete against Stuart Little. And Stuart Little was scheduled as a like Christmas family release, and they're like, we got to have our own Christmas family release, and so let's take that weird Star Trek movie and turn it into a family film because the kids all love Tim Allen right now. And that's pretty much the story of how we got this version of the movie, right? So it is a like weirdly capitalist sort of, studio fuckery story, but also like this is the one I want. Like I actually don't want to see the R-rated version of this movie. Like I want the family friendly one. But it was very bizarrely marketed because it did sort of, it was a sort of like the idea of it as kind of a satire or parody was kind of underplayed in the marketing of it. And the idea of it being sort of a family space comedy was sort of, promoted above all else. I feel like this could have made a shitload more money if they'd released it in the summer and advertised it as the movie it actually was, which is just a bizarre outcome. But anyway, I'm fascinated by sort of that part of this movie's legacy.
I'm surprised. Like, okay, so something that I think the 90s did really well was that it made movies that were PG but not for kids too. So, and specifically I'm thinking about romantic comedies. There were a lot of PG and PG-13 romantic comedies that were clearly not for kids, but they were not super off color or racy either. They were still pretty chaste and, cute. And so it seems like, but Galaxy Quest tried to push it too far. They tried to push it too much into a kids movie when maybe, or at least in the marketing, when they could have just been like, it's a movie for everyone. And that might have, like movies that your parent that the grown-ups want to see, but you can bring your kids and they're not going to have any hard questions afterward. You don't have to worry they're going to repeat anything at school, that kind of stuff. So I don't know, but it sounds like because of the Stuart Little, they were really thinking we'll make a lot more money if we convince people that this is a movie for kids. That seems like a mistake.
Agreed.
But now I think as someone who watches things for adults and things for kids, it feels like there's this incredible like chasm. Like there are things that are for kids and there are things that are like, I don't know, really, really adult. And then there's very little in the middle.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe Bluey, but that's really for kids. I mean, I wouldn't watch Bluey
Bluey forever.
myself, but
yeah, I would.
general.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have to because
I wouldn't because I don't have to. Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I go upstairs and the kids are around, it's either that or like Casey Undercover reruns or something. But
Right.
yeah, my kids and I love
yeah.
Bluey. So yeah, no, I completely
Would you
agree.
want, Julia, what do you think? Do you think that are you interested in the R-rated Galaxy Quest beyond like anthropologically? I mean, I would love if you could see it. I want to see, but
Yeah,
I don't
for
think
sure.
that it
I would be interested in seeing the more Star Trek-y version, which I don't, which like I think would fall in that category still. Like there might be like more making out and stuff, but not necessarily, like a lot of sweary stuff or sex scenes or stuff like that. But I don't. Yeah, my primary interest was sort of like more sort of like, okay, like do we get some backstory about the ethnic ambiguity here with Tony Shaloub, or do we find out like what exactly kind of alien, intelligent alien race Al Rickman's character is supposed to be from, like exactly what's going on with the fins on the head, like those were kind of questions I had. So I'd be interested in seeing that version of the movie. But then, like as I was saying before, I don't know if that would actually be a better version of the movie.
I think there's something to be said about PG movies having to rein themselves in slightly with the comedy. So the thing you say about like Tony Shalhoub and the ethnic backstory or whatever, like that joke just works better like just being there, right? It just works better as a joke that has no explanation and that you have to kind of know what the joke is to get the joke, and it's a funnier joke that way. And if you start opening yourself up to R-rated comedy where you can, explore a lot more stuff, like sometimes that is what leads to overkill, I think, in comedy. Like there is something to be said about the idea that like the rating makes the jokes funnier because you have to be more suggestive than sort of, you have to do more telling and not showing, I guess, like that sometimes that makes for a funnier gag, right? And it's interesting talking about this, having just talked about Austin Powers, right? Because it's like that is sort of those are sort of the polar opposites of like the comedy that tries to milk every possible mile right out of the joke versus you get this or you don't, but like we're gonna let this joke sit there, and if you understand what we're referencing, then like it's gonna be funny to you later on.
Yeah, and then like if those jokes had been more pointed, maybe the movie would not have aged as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I'm like, again, this movie, like really, the comedy in this movie ages. Like it's another thing we talked about in Austin Powers, right? Like the comedy in this movie is still really good. Like it ages incredibly well. I don't think anything. I didn't catch a joke in this where I was like, ooh, that doesn't really fly really well today. I think all of it is pretty. I mean, if either of you object to that, I don't know. But like, I couldn't find anything where I thought this was the jokes don't land anymore. It all is remarkably like still funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
I can't either. Yeah.
Cool. That's good. It's a rare thing to find in this podcast, especially.
Keep it in circulation. Let's keep it going. Yeah.
and do the sequel with Sam Rockwell that we have
Oh,
described to you, and you can pay
yes.
us $1 million, and you can then
Buy us out like the
buy
guy
us
who wrote
out.
the original
Yeah.
Let's
Captain
if we're gonna do a
Starshine, I
sequel,
think it
let's
was
do it
called.
all the way through, including buying our idea and then doing something
Mhm.
totally different with it.
Yeah.
Come on, Hollywood. We're
I mean, I just watched the 4th season on Netflix. I think there's a real appetite for midlife crisis marriage stories.
yeah.
How do you stay? And it's very
Yeah.
clear that this is the kind of role play that would get their fires stoked
And
again.
because I've thought about this a lot, like I think the Sam Rockwell version of Galaxy Quest that in the last 25 years has become the new franchise with him at the center of it, like
Mhm.
is a lot darker and a lot more sort of like, you know, Disney Plus Star Wars series ish, and like I think that should be part of the tension as well.
Yeah.
I got ideas. Come
May-
on, give me a call.
Maybe the tension is that he is like Sam Rockwell now, an
Right,
Oscar-winning actor,
Mhm.
right,
and
yes,
like he's doing television, but has a lot of notes and
right.
Oh yeah.
is
And he's the
VP
guy who
of.
gets all the autographs at the conventions because like he is now the fan favorite, and yeah. Oh, it's gonna be so good, this movie that may or may not exist. It's gonna be a real bummer if they do make a sequel and it's nothing like what we've talked about, and it's bad. But I don't think that's gonna happen because I feel like the people behind this movie really love it so much that they
I can't
um,
decide whether I want their actual sequel to be better than ours, so we'll feel like, oh, this was even better, or worse, so that we can say ours was so much better.
either way we win. I think
Yeah, I think it's a win-win.
that's ultimately, especially if we become, they buy us out for millions of dollars.
Mhm.
All right,
I
so
do.
I
I do
think
have a tough time with it without Alan Rickman, though.
They
that is
Makes me
will. They
sad.
will.
they
He
will,
was
but I
just really
also
great.
you can also like make the death of Alan Rickman like a thing as part of the plot as well, right?
Mhm.
Struggling with the loss of Sir Alexander Dane,
Yeah,
um, who is now officially a Sir. Uh,
John was telling me that there's a cut scene where he gets knighted.
Oh.
We don't know exactly when in the timeline that happens, but like maybe they could do a little posthumous tribute where it's like, oh yes, Olivier, an Academy Award winning Alexander Dane, like
Mhm.
he achieved all his dreams.
See, I
Oh, well,
love that idea
that would
too.
be great. Yeah, I think a little wish fulfillment for his character. He deserves it because he really gets into the spirit by the end. So,
Yeah, it's unclear to me whether or not it was cut or whether it was like filmed and cut or like cut from the script. I'm not sure exactly like which of the two it is, but yes, there is like the implication that he was actually knighted, like, and that it was a part of the plot that he had been knighted by Queen Elizabeth. uh, and I think like for the better because I don't like the idea. I like the idea that he like never quite made it as that kind of British actor, right? I think that's a kind of funnier um, spin on it than he used to be a great Shakespearean stage actor and like now has been resorted um, to Star Trek. But like that's also that's the Patrick Stewart thing, right? Like, but Patrick Stewart has also like gone back to doing Shakespeare and stuff, and was never really pigeonholed into Star Trek, which is sort of a fascinating thing for someone to be able to do if you're also Professor X and a bunch of other nerdy shit. So is there any more trivia from the documentary or anything else that you guys want to talk about before we wrap up?
I had a piece of trivia from the documentary that I thought was really interesting, which was
Yeah.
I think it was the producer was saying that like kind of the best thing that can happen to your movie is to have your studio be making a bigger, more important movie at the same time, and then they just ignore you. And in this case, that movie was Gladiator. And part of the reason the um, uh, Gladiator was getting so much attention was because Oliver Reed had died on set, and they needed to go
Right.
figure out how to deal with that. So Oliver Reed died, so Galaxy Quest could live.
oh.
Interesting. There you go.
Well, I have one more piece of trivia I'd like to add as well.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe more on the uh meta critical side. The character of Saris, the villain.
Yes.
is
I was
named
gonna
after
ask.
Andrew Sarris,
Yeah, that's
the
funny.
film critic renowned for popularizing the auteur theory from
Yep.
French critics of the Cahiers de Cinema and bringing it to the United States. Now, for people who are listening, maybe people know, but auteur theory is one that sort of privileges the director as the artist of the film. So rather than saying, like, we're going to look at all film noirs or we're going to look at all movies with Nicolas Cage, it would be like, we're going to consider together all of the films by Dean Parisot. We're going to look at all the films together by Harold Ramis. I also took classes with Andrew Sarris. I don't think he knew who I was, but
Really?
I was in the
I
room.
did
Yes,
too. Yeah.
he was. Yes, it's the
Yeah.
Columbia connection.
I don't know how much he was in the room. To
I
be
know
to
he
be
didn't know
totally
me
honest.
for. Yeah, I think we wrote criticism for him. So that was a great part of the class. He would show
Wow.
whatever movies he had to review that week. He was like, have a advanced screener. He's like, let's put it on. Um, so I think it's really funny that Saris is the namesake of the villain. I don't totally know what to make of it because it's not as though the film was pretty critically
Yeah.
received critically well, but it's
Yeah.
almost like it's anticipating a
Yeah.
critical backlash or wants to ally itself more with sort of middle brow, low brow entertainment, being like, I know you're not going to like it, but we're ready for you. So I don't really know what it gains, but I think for the cinephiles out there, it's a fun piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I was thinking the whole time, I was like, it has to be because Saris is not a good alien villain name at
It's really
all.
not. It's really not.
And but yeah, I was also a little bit perplexed by it because like he was into genre cinema as well, you know, and
Yeah,
yeah.
I really don't know where that came from, but I was entertained by it because it was a reference that wasn't a Star Trek one, so I got it. Like, so I was like, oh, I know what this means. Um, but then again, as we talk about, it, I'm like, but what did it mean? I know who that is. That's really what I should say.
That's funny.
Yeah.
We should also say that Saris is played by Robin Sachs, who, genre aficionados of the '90s would know best as Ethan Rayne from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the
Oh,
arch enemy of Giles in Buffy. So there you go. Not recognizable through all
no.
that makeup, which one critic described as like if the Borg and the bad guys from Bug's Life had a had a baby or whatever, which I think is an accurate way of describing the vibe.
I was impressed. I thought like we're for the 90s we're doing a pretty good job of not making this too
Yeah,
ethnically problematic.
it's true. Yeah, and also just like
Cuz
in terms of like the actual makeup is like really good. It's pretty like it's not it's like right in that border between like sophisticated alien makeup and also like being sort of ridiculous and cheesy. It's very well designed. But yeah, it's not too ethnically problematic. which is a miracle for the '90s. Julie, do you want to give Annie our last two questions?
yes, Annie, could you
Yes.
tell us uh your favorite or favorites films of 1999?
Sure. I think that gosh. Okay, so I'm gonna name one that I feel like um I haven't seen it for a long time, but it was very meaningful to me for a silly reason, which is Girl Interrupted. Uh, from 1999, when I was a freshman in high school, and mm, when you were a freshman, you got a senior big sister, like to like take you, to like help you acclimate to high school. And so my big sister took me with some of her senior friends to see Girl Interrupted in at a movie theater that was attached to a mostly abandoned mall that existed primarily, I think, to get mugged and to eat at Bennigan's. So we didn't get mugged, but we did. But it was a place where you were not supposed to be alone. Um, but I was like 14, so what would I have been doing there? So we went to see Girl Interrupted, and then we ate at Bennigan's, and they talked about how they dated because they were like seniors and I was only a freshman, and it was probably the best day of my life. Just like I would say up to that point, but it's really hard to top feeling that cool, and a little troubling to think of how cool I felt at a chain restaurant in an otherwise empty mall. But I think there's something about the sisterhood of the Girl Interrupted, somehow me like entering teenage girldom, that it's a very special movie to me. But I feel like that doesn't have a ton to do with the movie. But I did think the movie was great, and I saw it several times at the time. In terms of like films that I have actively like revisited, I mean, like you say, there's like a lot of sort of troubling or the movies that haven't like held up super well. Like I loved Never Been Kissed, but now I don't know what I feel
Mm.
about it. I feel very ambivalent.
There are some
And I
issues with Never Been Kissed.
there are some.
Yeah.
Um, looking at the list of movies that you haven't done, I really liked October Sky,
Love
at the
October Sky.
time.
Yeah.
So I think it's time for me to rewatch that one. And
Mhm.
there are some movies, and I loved Drop Dead Gorgeous at the time, but I don't even. Can you get it now? For a long time, it was unavailable.
It's hard to find. It was on it was on HBO for a while. I don't know if it is right now. Yeah, it kind of comes and goes. So, but yes, also a favorite.
So yes, I mean, I tended to like the comedies and the romances. That was what I was watching in 1999. Um, and the movie that I feel like I'm just answering a question you didn't ask me, but the movie that I haven't seen from 1999 that I still haven't and that I'm looking to watch soon is But I'm a Cheerleader.
Oh yeah,
Never
okay,
seen that
that's a good one
before,
too.
but
Yeah.
that's on my list. But
Okay.
yes, of these movies, I think that Girl Interrupted was the most special to me. And some of the teen movies like 10 Things I Hate About You and Never Been Kissed are also big ones. But I feel like I haven't seen 10 Things I Hate About You for a long time either. I don't know how well that one holds up. It
It's
doesn't
great.
have the teacher plot line that like makes me go, ooh, with Never Been Kissed, but
Yeah, no,
yeah,
10 Things definitely has like there's certainly some like uses of words that we would not like put
sure.
into right. And like a couple of, questionable sort of choices with some characters and plot lines and stuff. But like it's still a great movie. Like it is a
Yeah.
essential, like in the same way that some things in like 16 Candles and The Breakfast Club like don't like are really off-putting now
Mhm.
because it was the 80s, like because it was the late 90s. That's but it's not, certainly not in the same way where it's like let's make a joke out of like sexual assault like we do at the end of American Pie, right? It's
Yeah.
not that, right? So
No.
certainly it holds up better and has a sort of core sweetness to it that I think is super important.
Yeah.
That yeah, it's still great. So I think you can still feel good about
Good.
uh,
Good, good.
10
But
Things I
yes, I
Hate
would
About.
stick I think Girl Interrupted I think was it was really I think it was really well performed, really interesting movie
Mm-hmm.
at the time, and uh very I just a lot of girls my age really liked it at the time.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
went to see it together, talk about it. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and I think it's good to have that like mix of movie that you love and also like a nostalgia for the time that you saw it. Like, is
Yes.
right. That's an important.
Well, I
That's an
mean,
important
it just happens to be the year that I was 14, so it's hard for me to
yeah,
disconnect
yeah,
like myself from the movies in a way that I don't feel that same connection about a movie that happened before I was born or one that I
yeah.
saw from a year or two ago is less about my personal journey. I actually have a real problem with that. I sometimes forget how I've seen movies more recently. My husband's really offended because I'll be like, "Have you ever seen that?" He's like, "I saw that with you. We went out and we saw it." And I was like, "I mean, did we talk through the whole thing? I don't know. Like, you were there. I'm sure you were there. Like, but I don't remember who I see movies with, but I do from like teenager because that was like a big social outing to go see a movie.
Yeah,
I
when
sound
you
like I lived in like
no, when
I lived in
you
the middle of nowhere. I lived in suburbia, and it was a big deal to go to the movies.
um when you'd mentioned Charlie's Angels, it made me think that I went to see that with my theater tech nerd friends, who you will be surprised to hear were all boys, and that it was a somewhat
That's a weird
awkward
one to see with
viewing
boys. Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
I saw it on a group date, which is another way of saying not a date, but it was a lot of people together, and hypothetically, some people were on dates. Do you know what I
I think
mean?
I did
Like,
too. I
Mhm.
think
I
that's
saw it
exactly
on a
how I
group
saw
date,
Charlie's Angels.
which
Yeah,
is was also not a great date movie. I think
Well,
I'm
it's
for me.
at the time, Tom Green and Drew Barrymore were together, so it was very romantic to see them on screen at the same
Yeah.
time. So speaking of
But I
1990s.
also I think I saw girl Charlie's Angels Full Throttle with female friends, and I feel like that's the best way to watch Charlie's Angels is with other women.
With Bennigans or no Bennigans?
No Bennigans. That was only the one time. That's why it remains so sacrosanct. That one outing to Bennigans with older girls who had more exciting personal lives, and let me like listen in on it. It was cool. Yeah. Did
Okay,
you have another question? Yeah.
Second question. You are at a party.
Mm.
Somebody corners you and asks you, what is your favorite movie of all time? You absolutely cannot get out of the conversation. How do you respond?
Okay. So I snoot. I did I was invited to do that list of the best films for the BFI a year or two ago,
Okay.
and I put as number 1 The Apartment, directed by Billy Wilder.
Mm-hmm.
So for that crowd, that is my answer. For a
Mm-hmm.
certain kind of film community, my favorite film is The Apartment. But if I were to assess like what's my favorite movie by what's the movie that I've just like seen a lot and like I never not watch, it's When Harry Met Sally. I can't help it. I don't think it's the best movie ever made, but it might be a movie that feels like it just like is a part of me now because I've been watching it for so long. I feel like those are real people. So I guess that's I feel like that has to be my favorite movie, even though when I'm thinking about in terms of what makes a movie great, it probably more The Apartment in terms of sort of the ways that it challenges you, aesthetically what it's doing. When Harry Met Sally doesn't really have a plot. It's just hanging out with those people for 90 minutes. But I
Yeah.
think it might be the movie, like, that's my movie.
I've often talked about the hanging out with people movies that I really love, and I love that about When Harry Met Sally as well. So much that you're like just sad that they're gone when it's over, and that you're never going to see them again.
I mean, I really do think Carrie Fisher, like, if I ever, when I am so old that I lose my memory, or if I'm subject to some sort of, like, I get frozen in ice like Encino Man, I don't want to be too dark, I feel like I would really believe Carrie Fisher was my friend, that she'd been my friend, the one, you're right, I know you're right. I feel like I've been in those conversations. Not just like, oh, that reminds me of something. Like, no, I feel like I've actually had that conversation with this particular person who isn't real. This is, as I say it out loud, I'm like, this is my Galaxy Quest. 1989 Manhattan is my space travel. Because I was 4, so it's not like I actually lived in that moment. But I've seen that movie enough times that I feel like that is the one. I could dress up. I would wear the Billy Crystal sweater and go to the convention for When Harry Met Sally.
Annie, this is reminding me of you back in whenever it was, when the kind of internet discourse about men always thinking about the Roman Empire came up, and your very smart response, which I identified with, is like that for women the Roman Empire is Tudor history.
Yes, it's Anne Boleyn.
Yeah,
like,
so like that might be my Galaxy Quest.
Yeah. I mean,
what's your Galaxy Quest?
Is the 6 wives of Henry and Elizabeth II, Elizabeth I, excuse me. I think it's those that's my knowing that Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour's, that's a third wife, her brother was married to Henry's 6th wife, his widow.
Was all creepy with Elizabeth.
Yes,
when she was
I know. How do people get into it? Men of America, get interested in Tudor history. Maybe don't. I'm not sure. Maybe you don't need it.
I mean, I'm
stick with the Roman Empire.
I'm much more interested in Tudor history than the Roman Empire, but that's
is that really even true? That's a different podcast. But are men really thinking about the Roman Empire?
I don't think they are. I think a certain kind of like a certain kind of men are often like it's
very online men.
Very online men are thinking about a fantasy version of the Roman Empire that never existed, and that's really what the meme is about. But yeah,
I think about the Roman Empire more now in sort of like an end of empire moments. I'll be like, oh,
sure,
this is what it was like at the end.
Yeah,
Brandon
I think about
Circus
Gladiator. I think they think about Gladiator, and I think that's what I think that's the reason.
Now I'm wondering if Claudius is my.
Oh
I'm thinking of
man.
Man of La Mancha. Do you know that musical? Like, to each his Dulcinea, meaning everyone has like their thing, and I feel
Yeah.
like we all have our own Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Mine's
yeah,
like Jurassic Park. I just want to like go there.
just thinking about dinosaurs all the time.
Dinosaurs. No,
That's
I think
good.
about dinosaurs constantly. So, you know. Okay, we'll leave it
Cool.
there. Annie,
Yeah.
this was a lot of fun. You know what? You should next time we have you, we should
Mm-hmm.
to sort of complete the 1999 like movies about TV thing. We still haven't done Ed TV, so we should talk about that one.
Oh, I remember that sort
Right?
of. I watched that in
Sort of
a
like
hotel on
anti-truth show.
pay-per-view. Remember when that was a thing?
Yeah, one of the beginnings, like one of the genesis points of the McConaughey and Woody Harrelson saga. So
Oh,
it's
you're
interesting
right.
to talk, right?
What
Interesting
an
to talk about
interesting story.
from that perspective. Oh boy, sure is.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, thanks so much for having me. This has been a blast.
Thank you
and I
for
appreciate it.
joining us. Where do you live on the internet? That people
Where do I
can,
live on the internet? Okay.
yeah.
I am on Twitter and Blue Sky and Instagram, and everything is my handle is at say anything instead of anything,
I get
ANNIE thing.
Yep. That's
Yep.
good. I like that.
So find me there, follow me. I
Um,
periodically say things and mostly link to articles that I
about the Roman
written or
Empire
commissioned. Yeah.
or
And
Tudor
what
history.
Anne Boleyn. If anybody wants, if I wanted to buy some very niche Anne Boleyn, what do you call it? Memorabilia. Maybe I should put like a little Venmo. You can send me money to buy an Anne Boleyn upholstered chair, which is a real thing I saw. Yeah. I don't know.
You can watch Galaxy Quest for free on Pluto TV with ads. You can watch it on Amazon Prime for money. You can also watch Never Surrender, the documentary about Galaxy Quest on Amazon Prime. I think for money, or is that not for money? Is that
That's
free?
free.
That's free.
free.
Free
Mhm.
on Amazon Prime as long
Or
as
you could
don't
give the money
support
to Apple and buy it on Galaxy Quest. You could get Galaxy Quest on Apple and then watch the free one on Amazon.
it. Okay,
If
that's
you
another
don't
option.
like Amazon
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
Right. Pick your evil corporation to give money
Yeah, exactly.
to, and
Right.
and do it that way.
Pick your poison and enjoy Galaxy Quest.
Or endure ads on Pluto TV, which oddly feel right for this movie to have ads interrupting it every few minutes.
Well, my Amazon account started putting ads in it, and I don't know. That's a separate. That's another day.
We live in
Another day,
hell.
another dollar. I don't know. I thought I paid, but it's like what do you call it? Like a loan shark. Like now I owe them more money. It's like there's been interest accrued, and they're like, no, you're back to ads until you pay more. So
it's how they get
okay.
you. You can find me on Blue Sky at John Brooks. You can find Julia at Julia Sermons. You can find the show at 1999 the podcast. Keep having a good summer, and we'll see you next time. Hail for Frogs.